Hello, everybody. My name is Ethan Roberts. Today I'm going to be talking about the Enigma machine. A lot of you have probably heard of it before. It was one of the pinnacle cryptography devices we had, especially during the early 1900s. It got its recognition because it was the German army's cryptography machine during World War II. And there's a massive history behind it and how it was broken. And I'm going to go a little bit into that shortly. But first, I want to talk a little bit about how it actually works. So, what is the Enigma? Okay, the Enigma was an encryption system. It was used by the German military during World War II. Uh, It was a wooden box. It was small. It was about 32 centimeters in length, 26 in width, and 15 in height. And it was really kind of built to be portable because, I mean, they optimized it for military use, obviously. So it had to be able to get moved around, and you had to be able to send a lot of them out to various officers in whatever branch of the armed forces it had to be at. So, a quick description of it, it had a typewriter-like keyboard and three rotary wheels, or usually three. There's a couple with more, but it usually had three rotary wheels, sorry. And that is what the encryption was based off of. It was based off these settings that the wheels were on, and depending on what uh, wires were plugged into the wire board, the plug board at the front of the thing would depend on what they were substituted to. So the Enigma, it used the substitution cipher, which is something all of us should have a pretty good idea about. But here's a little diagram just to quickly show. Obviously, the substitution cipher is pretty straightforward. Uh, it's where you shift each letter of the alphabet depending on whatever number of places you choose, which is usually your key. Obviously, it's the basic version of that is just the Caesar cipher. But so that's the key kind of idea that this worked behind, but it worked in a much more advanced way. It had this layout of board and holes in front of it, and depending on how you wired them up would depend on the key. That would choose the key. So the Germans would receive a new code book every so often, every month or so, with new keys in it, depending on, or that they had to choose that day. And they would follow them. So uh, one day it could be AL, uh, one day it could be PR. The one here is A, J, and S, O. Now, that would choose the amount that they were displaced at. Right, that would choose the key. So that would do a initial Caesar cipher, substitution cipher that would then go into the that would then be scrambled based off the position that the rotors were in. Now, depending on the rotor, it could be 2, 3, 1, right? And that would choose a whole level of substitution on top of the already in place level of encryption that there was. And kind of, it's kind of insane because the amount of encryption that they're able to do with it was obscene for the time. Uh, Due to the fact that, each wheel, and there's three of them, has 26 characters in it because it's one for each letter of the alphabet. That essentially already gave them over 17,000 different positions for this thing to be in and to create that many different possibilities as to what the key could be. But the the way it was designed, it had with the plug board in it, it the mathematics behind it became uh 26 exclamation point over 6 exclamation point times 10 exclamation point times 2 raised to the power of 10. That resulted in over 150 quintillion different options that this thing could emit. It was truly at the time the essence of military grade encryption. And the fact that the Allies were able to crack this is no small feat. It took years, it took dozens of very intelligent mathematicians, and it wasn't really until the US joined at the end of the war that they finally were able to crack all of the different types of the enigmas that the Germans had. So I want to talk a little bit about how it came to be and why it's so important. So in early development of this thing, it was actually originally designed by a couple of Dutch naval officers. Their names were Theo A. van Helgen and R.P.C. Spengler. Now, they originally designed it for the Dutch military forces. I've also read that it was used in Dutch banking to share sensitive banking information that they could then encrypt, and then you wouldn't have to worry about people reading some stuff about your bank, which makes a lot of sense. But there were a couple of iterations before really the Germans got a hold of it. Um, there was the printing one, which is this one down here on the left. It uh, worked like a typewriter essentially, with the encryption on it. It had a lot of issues. It didn't really work great, especially compared to the other versions of it. Um, and that's probably just because, I mean, typewriters weren't always the most effective thing ever. And when you try and input encryption into the same system, it's probably going to mess up quite often. But the second one is the glow lamp, which is the one here in the middle. It um it had these glow lights in it, which would glow depending on what keys you were using, depending on how you wired it. Uh, the different letters would glow the different numbers, and that was kind of the basic one that most of the other ones kind of um, became. Now, I mean that, and again, very quickly, within a couple of years, they went from Enigma A, which is what they knew as the glow lamp, the one in the middle, and they created Enigma B, which was just a slight different variation, and then they created Enigma C, which had all 26 keys, A through Z, and a lamp equal for each, right? And there were several variants of this one produced. Um, Really, the only two special ones were uh, the Germans and the Swedish. They had 28 keys, so they had an even stronger level of encryption than the standard 26. And then there were a couple more improvements, and they were sold commercially to banks and other countries, intelligence services. Uh, they were kind of just sold around a little bit, and those weren't like the highest quality Enigmas. They were still some of the more basic ones with just the three rotor wheels, 26 keys. Uh, but they did create a four rotor one, which will come in kind of important later. But that machine was known as Enigma D, or there's a bunch of names of it. I've read that it was called a model or Enigma model A26. And it's kind of like the preced predecessor, sorry, of the one that the Germans actually used during the war. Now, the military Enigma. This is when things really pick up. Now, this is through the late 20s and 30s. So we're coming out of World War II, or right, coming out of World War II. Um, Things are heating back up. The Germans are definitely preparing for something. Uh, but they put in a lot of work to the Enigma. They had optimized this thing for use in the field. They made it compact. They made it much stronger than just the one you could buy. They redesigned it so it wasn't a single-ended output anymore. It was a double-ended output, so it had what I'm trying to say. It had a greater level of cryptography or encryption than its predecessors. And that one was put into service the 1st of June 1930. So it took a while to get there because the first one was made in 1915, but they made some improvements over the years, and it definitely became something that was a force to be reckoned with. Now, not long after that, the Germans started ordering these things in large numbers. Uh, they were buying enough to essentially give to everyone they needed to in the army and their air force. Okay. Now, they also bought a significant G model ones, which were very similar, but they were specifically used by the German intelligence services. You'll find every branch of the military, for at least the Germans, for whatever reason, did not use really the same thing. Um, Specifically the Navy. The Navy is the firecracker of all of this. The M1 Enigma, which would later become the M2 and the M3 and the M4 over a period of about 8 years, those were the notorious one. This is the one that Alan Turing and uh, Dilly Knox, they could not break. This is the one that the Americans had to come in with their big machines and fresh resources before they could even break these. But I digress. So let's keep going a little bit. So, and I just mentioned a couple of these, or not these guys. These were the pioneers of what we know as or the first ones to break the encryption, the pioneers of breaking it. Um, the guy up here on the top, his name is Marion R. I'm not gonna butcher his name. And the guy below him is Jersey. I didn't get a picture of Henrik, unfortunately, but these three young mathematicians were the first ones to uh, not only really attempt to break it, but were the first successful ones for sure. They were able to develop these things called the Zyglaxy sheets, which are similar to a thing that the British intelligence used called the Jeremy sheets. Essentially, it was diagrams, it was charts that showed the double encryption message and how it was laid out. So it was a guideline to solving these messages before they had obviously the machines to do it by hand. Or they had to do before they had the machines to do it, they had to do it by hand. And those sheets were what allowed them to do that. Now, it took over 100 interceptions of messages coming from the Germans before they were actually able to get the initial order or any of the settings that the Germans had for the Enigma machine. It They were very particular about every member of the army using a particular code, a particular setting on a particular day. Because of that, it took so long for these guys to break the messages and kind of start seeing somewhat of a pattern. It wasn't until 19 no, sorry. In 1933, the Bureau got access to the Enigma machine, with the Bureau being the Polish Bureau of, or the Polish Cipher Bureau, Polish Bureau of Cryptography. Um, they got their hands on one, the operating procedures, and then through that, they were able to confirm a massive amount of messages from the Germans, which pretty much did all but say that they were prepping for war. So by this time, these Polish guys are pretty close to Germany, and they're like, well, we should probably get this information out of Poland before it's too late. And that is what happened. They moved to this place here. I'm sorry for the blurry photo, but this is I don't want to butcher the name, Bletchley Park. It was the place where Alan Turing, Dilly Knox, a bunch of other very smart guys. You had Alastair Dennison, you had Gordon Welchman. Those are those two guys on the end. Um, the one in the down here in the order, it's Alastair Dennison, Dilly Knox, Alan Turing, and Gordon Welchman. Those are the four gentlemen down at the bottom, and they were very important in the breaking of the Enigma machine during the war, especially before the US stepped in and after the invasion of Poland. So now, Bletchley Park, it is a place not far from London. It's a park that during World War II became the home of the British Cryptography Intelligence Service. Um, Essentially, their whole goal here was to break the German encryption, right? It was here that Winston Churchill literally gave them the highest uh, classification of information like that the British ever had, the top secret ultra. He created it specifically to be one step above top secret because he believed that the information that they were getting and the work they were doing needed to remain absolute secret uh, at all times. So kind of cool moment there. But um, it was about July 25th of 39. Uh, the Polish code breakers that I showed previously, they invite their friends with the British because there was a lot of correspondence between the British and the French well before, or not the British, the Polish and the French well before the British got involved. But they invite their friends of the French, their French allies, and the Mr. Dilly Knox from the British intelligence, or he wasn't really part of intelligence yet. He was more just a really smart mathematician and a really good code breaker. But um, they invite him over to where they were doing their work in Poland, showed them everything they learned. They showed them the alphabetical order of the Enigma's disks, something that they couldn't figure out previously. Um, Not only that, but they actually gave them both. They gave the French and the British replicas of the Enigma machine so that they could continue to learn more about it and conduct research in their own homelands. So after that, at Bletchley Park, Alan Turing, one of the most well-known cryptographers and codebreakers of the time, he was the guy in the movie Imitation Game. If you've seen that, he developed the bomb, not like a grenade or something we'd drop from the sky, but um, it was based off a Polish design that they were using to break cryptographies well before this, but he did it a little differently. He used a method that was based on cribs, which uh, is educated guesses to certain pieces of the plain text. He used it to develop a method that was more universal than just pure mathematics. Um, and that's kind of still a method we implement today. Uh, like if you can guess part of a encrypted set and you get it right, that saves you a lot of work and it gets you in a place where you can actually keep going from then on. So that method was again pioneered by Turing here when he developed the bomb. And I don't have a picture of the bomb from the UK, but I do have a picture of the one from America in a little bit. That is the one that they used to break the Navy's encryption. So these are just a couple of other ones because there's a lot of variations of this over the years, and there was no way I could cover all of them. But there was the Japanese one, which is the one down here on the right. It was more manual. It really didn't have a lot of bells and whistles. It was kind of like what it was. You rotated the thing and you changed the letters depending on it. But um, and the one next to it's the Abwehr Enigma. This one's just kind of crazy. It was unbreakable by Turing's bomb. No matter how many messages they tried to decrypt, no matter how powerful, how many improvements they made to the bomb, they could not break this one. And it had four rotors, to more than the three. It's the one that the Navy was using, the one that I've been talking about this whole time. Um, the final variation of theirs was this Abwehr Enigma uh, that was so massively complex that even the bomb that they had made specifically to break these things could not do it. And like I said, there was a bunch of other ones. There was Enigma 1, 2, 3, 4, MG, M1, M2, M3. There's tons of them, and they're all variations, very slight differences depending. Some have more rotors, some have less. Some had, I think there was one uh, with eight at one point. I think they just kept adding rotors. I don't know if it was very practical. Um, but the Enigma M4 was the German one, and it's probably the most popular of all the Enigma machines just because it was so difficult to break. This is it down here on the bottom. You can see it has four rotary wheels, so yet another level of encryption. Uh, they gave that's another multiplication of 26 onto the number that was already 17,000. So yeah, a lot. But it was specifically used by the Navy. Why they didn't give it to the Army or the Air Force, I don't know. And I'm not worried about it. But it was specifically used by the Navy. And it wasn't until the Americans joined the war, um, and a couple months had passed when the, sorry, the Allies that were already working on the decryption of these codes, they decided to bring the Americans into the fold. So they bring American intelligence into it. They give them all the information they had. They give them uh, like replicas of the Enigmas. They give them everything they can to just see what the Americans can do. The Americans develop a bomb similar to Turing's, except this time it was designed with the four rotors in mind. It had a crazy amount of electronics to it. That's it down there in the bottom. So you can see the difference in size that it took for us to crack this code as opposed for them to make it. Because making it, all you needed was that little box down there in the left that could fit in your lap. To crack that same code, you had to have a machine that was over 4 people long and taller than the height of a person with an immeasurable amount of technology inside of it for the 40s. The Americans built 120 of these, uh, and it was with those that they essentially took the bulk of all the messages that were encrypted with the M4 and just did it themselves. Most of the other in like the three rotor traffic, the easy codes that they've been breaking the entire war, they left that to the UK and what was left of the Poland mathematicians that escaped to the UK. But like I said, the Americans really took the bulk of the heavy encryptions. Now, um, I want to talk a little bit about after the war, though. Um, so after the war, the Enigma had been broken. They decided to keep it secret for years, uh, as one does after a war. Obviously, they weren't gonna just let that information out. But all most of the bombs were dismantled. I don't actually know if there are any still on display today. There are a significant amount of enigmas that are on display in various places. On the CIA's website, you can actually look at the archive record and you can see pictures and descriptions of it. But most of the captured ones were vaulted, most of the bombs were dismantled. Um, Surprisingly, though, I didn't think I'd have to talk about them at all, but the Russians, they didn't even know about the Enigma. They weren't clued in on the whole cryptography mini war that was going on in here. Um, and they didn't really develop their own until over a decade later. In 56, they designed it. It was called the Fialka, and it's right up there in the top right. It's the Enigma on steroids. It has like eight rotor wheels, um, but it was a little late, but it's fine. And the Americans, not long after, developed the KL-7, which was used by all the branches of our armed forces. Uh, all branches of the U.S. Armed Forces used this thing, and it became the main cipher machine for NATO following the war. Um, these were very relatively quickly um, succeeded by electronic alternatives simply because once we started getting computers, these manual machines that did it just they don't stack up to what a computer can do. I mean, when you think about it, my cell phone could have cracked every message that was sent in World War II. It has uh, enough computing power. The computers that they used to put men on the moon um, for the first time, the average cell phone has more computing power nowadays. So it's kind of crazy to think about how the world's changed over the past 100 years. Uh, Not even that long, really, just like well, I guess like 80, close to 100 years. But uh, technology has come a long way, and I specifically think that um, the Enigma machine is very much responsible for some massive leaps in cryptography. I think that it was such a pinnacle for the time it was at because you had incredibly intelligent mathematicians who designed the Enigma to be this super uncrackable code writer, and it worked. I mean, it was something that it took years before people were cracking it. And even then, it took a equally as intelligent set of mathematicians and code breakers to crack it. And all of it being used to the degree that it was during wartime impacted that even further. The amount of um, improvement we had over just the 8 years from the development of the M1 to the M4 was insane. Like I said, the M4 was unbreakable until the Americans came in with fresh resources and fresh minds. Uh, and I think that led to a period, especially as we started getting more computing power and desktops and eventually laptops, and then now we're into cell phones. But it it's definitely highlighted the need for cryptography over the years, and it's given us more to think about. It's given us um, how can we make an encryption more secure? How can we make it in a way that there is no possible outcome that someone cracks it? It's improved the world over years without even really realizing it, just because it came at such a pivotal moment in human history. And the science behind it is insane. Over 150 quintillion uh, total numbers that the encryption could make. in the in the 30s, not even the 40s yet. That was in the 30s. That's insane. Anyway, um, I really, I thought that was really cool. I think the Enigma machine is uh, definitely an important piece of history, an important piece of cryptography history. And I know this presentation wasn't exactly supposed to be about history, um, but I feel like it is important to know. It's important to look at and realize that where we were and what we've come to. Uh, Not only that, but the substitution cipher is one of the most basic ciphers, and it's really cool that they were able to use it to that degree and it functioned that well in a period of such turmoil like war. That's just insane to me. Anyway, here are my citations. That link down there at the bottom is the timeline of the entire um, Enigma machine. It will highlight what uh, armies had it at what times, what commercial uh, entities you were able to buy it from, who was able to get it, and what time they did, and the improvements and everything. If anybody's interested in that, I just wanted to include that uh, right there for people to look at. Anyway, uh, thank you guys for watching, and I hope you enjoyed.